Some legends are told, some turn to dust or to gold, but you will remember me for centuries.
This is the Cameron Parker Show, brought to you by Spreaker, where we discuss everything from around the local professional sports scene in Colorado, such as the Denver Broncos.
Chris Harris comes out. I don't know if he was on the drive, but he said, I knew 15 seconds into that game that I should have been on T.Y. Hilton. If players are coming out and saying that, and it falls again on the coaching staff.
Not to mention insiders from around your local sports scene. Ryan Spilborgs, former outfielder for your Colorado Rockies.
It's not going to be the 25 guys that leave spring training that are going to be the only guys the entire season. I mean, you need depth. You need guys that are going to be in your minor leagues that you may not expect.
Ryan Edwards.
You know, when you're talking about an offensive line, it's about the five best guys, right? And you're talking about the five best guys gelling. There hasn't been a lot of time for that.
It's showtime. Are you ready?
Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen. It is another edition of the Cameron Parker Show, and I am joined by the singer-songwriter of, I guess, the Breaks, but he was on before. It is Sayre Bedinger, the editor, writer over at Predominantly Orange. How you doing?
Doing great, Cameron. Thanks for having me on again.
Yeah, we said we were going to do it, and
We're doing it.
And we're doing it. And it's first off, I want to get your take on it, because it's been a lot of the talk as far as the Star Wars premiere coming out, and we don't want to make it. We want to make it spoiler free, but it was definitely an incredible movie. Obviously, the Broncos are 1-0, by the way, on Star Wars premiere night.
Yeah.
So Broncos coming out on top.
Yeah, maybe the Broncos should just play, they should work a way to play every year on that Thursday night that Star Wars has a movie coming out.
If they did that, they'd be tying the Miami Dolphins for that undefeated record.
There you go. Yeah, I thought it was a great movie. I know a lot of fans are split on it, and that's okay. Everybody's got their opinions on it. I'm not here to say anybody's opinions are right or wrong, but I thought it was a really well-written movie. I'm really excited about all the new characters. I think after the first movie, in the first movie of this new trilogy, there was a lot of mix between the old Star Wars movies and the new characters they were trying to introduce, and there was that kind of healthy balance, and almost, it was almost a little too much nostalgia for some people, but this one really did a great job of blending the two, I thought, with Luke Skywalker and his role in the film, and obviously people who are listening will be able to go see that and find out, and with what Leia did, and then obviously some other twists and turns in there. But overall, I was really, really pleased with the outcome of the movie. It had me on even though I was in a recliner, sofa at the theater, it had me on the edge of my seat, at least in terms of being entertained, but it was also really engaging with the storyline, and so I thought it was a great movie, and I'm interested to know, as you're as big a Star Wars fan as I am, what you thought as well.
Well, I think for me, I liked The Force Awakens. I thought it was, one of the better Star Wars films that had been out, and we were talking about Rogue One, when that came out last year, that was such a different film, and we weren't really expecting, we weren't sure what to expect as far as with that film, because of the fact that we knew the story, and we knew at least what happened as far as the outcome, but we didn't know what was going on underneath it. And so, with this one, and I think that's why I kind of appreciate this story of like the 7, the 8, and the 9 soon to come, is that we honestly have no idea what is going to transpire. And I think that the one reason why I really liked Episode 8, probably more so than 7, was just how cohesive the story was. It felt like everything was flowing. In essence, it kind of felt like it was, as far as how a day went, it kind of felt like it was just a 24-hour, 38, actually I should say 28, maybe 48-hour time period, when in reality it was like probably, I should say maybe a 1 year, 2 year period, probably, maybe even more than that, and just by the whole landscape of the actual movie itself, as far as, where they were in the beginning to where they were at the end. It felt very cohesive, and I think that as far as the twists and turns potentially, because every movie is going to have a twist and turn at some point.
Mhm.
I thought the twists and turns were done incredibly well. They were unexpected. Um, and it just I think for J.J. Abrams, who's had a lot of backlash, potentially of being a Star Trek guy, and then soon to be taking the Star Wars role. And then obviously giving it now to Rian Johnson, but J.J. Abrams was still the executive producer of it. However, Rian Johnson was soon to be the director, but it was written incredibly well, I thought.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm in 100% agreement. It's just the story of Star Wars is not. It's not like the original story is the only story that can be told in the universe, and I think that that's part of what some people are struggling with a little bit is, well, it's not exactly how it used to be, or it's not exactly the way that they developed things back then, and it's a new twist on how the Star Wars story is and can be told, and I find it refreshing.
Yeah. And I think the one thing, and I'm sure you'll see it twice or three times or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm going to be seeing it in about 3 hours from now. It's going to be really interesting to see now that you see it a second time. Do you maybe it's also a question for you, is do you get maybe kind of a better appreciation of stuff that you potentially missed in the film? Because I know that for me, I certainly noticed things that I missed, potentially.
Yeah, I think that was one of the biggest things for me with Rogue One, is when I saw it for a second time, and I've watched Rogue One so many times. I've watched The Force Awakens so many. I've watched them all a lot.
Yeah.
When you watch these movies back another few times, and even if you do watch them back a few times, you still don't catch some things. Like, I'll watch, the Star Wars Explained on YouTube and things like that, and all those videos where they point out things. It's like Rogue One connected Star Wars Rebels to the big screen. One of the characters from Rebels was in Rogue One, Chopper, and I didn't realize that when I was watching the movie. But sure enough, he's in one of the scenes, and so is their ship, the Ghost. So it's just things like that you don't notice, that the Star Wars writers right now are really, like you said, cohesive. They're really working together to make sure that these storylines are in unison and in harmony with each other, and that comes out in in what they're putting out there right now. And so I for one can't get enough Star Wars content. I think a lot of what people are upset about is that some certain things are underdeveloped, and so that's all I'll really say about that. But I think that's also the beauty of what Star Wars is, because they can do so many things to develop these stories now with either single movies, like they did with Rogue One, or like what they're doing with Solo next year, and then they can also do the animated TV series, and so.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that there's so many different ways that they can expand on the stories of these characters that we don't need to worry about, what's happening in this specific trilogy. If something happens with a character and their storyline that somebody doesn't like or doesn't agree with, I think that there's so much room for the Star Wars writers right now to do things with it that it doesn't really bother me. It doesn't really faze me, and so. I think seeing it a second, third, fourth, however many times is gonna be great. Not only for the entertainment factor, but for noticing those small details that you might miss.
Yeah, and it's so funny because you and I have been mentioning also just how big Marvel fans we are,
Mm-hmm.
and Marvel's the same way, and it's one of the reasons why I've appreciated Marvel maybe a little bit over DC, is because, especially with the movies, is because ever since Iron Man, really, it's been incredibly cohesive as far as when Disney picked it up and started making it cohesive so that you can have an Avengers Infinity War. And maybe that's one of the reasons why, a little bit sidebar, but maybe that's why I got so amped up for the Star Wars Last Jedi was during one of the trailers was Infinity War. Maybe that's why. But
that is a plus.
Yeah.
You know what's funny about that too is people at the end of the Star Wars movie were sitting waiting around like there was going to be a scene at the end like in Marvel movies, and it's
Right.
like, no, this isn't a Marvel movie. You can leave your chair. Nothing's going to happen.
Right, but I appreciate it though, because it does kind of bring Disney to a fold that, while people may not appreciate the fact that Disney wasn't originally a product of Lucasfilm, that Disney has done a great job of making it so that everything wraps together, and you can notice those little nuances of potentially a movie. So, obviously it isn't why we're here to talk about Star Wars, as incredibly awesome as it is to talk Star Wars. We're here to talk about the Denver Broncos, the college football hires, and I've also noticed you are quite the baseball aficionado, so we're going to talk about the MLB winter meetings, and I want to get your take. I had a friend of mine on, I don't know if you had the opportunity to listen to it, who's also a baseball analytical guy, but I was going to get your thoughts about Shohei Ohtani and how potentially will that work. But we'll save the best for last as far as the Broncos and those winter meetings. But I want to start first by talking about the college football hires. Who potentially, in your eyes, could be a disappointment necessarily, or who could be one that's potentially surprising? I guess the biggest disappointment, it's going to be really hard to top the fact that Tennessee interviewed about 20 different candidates and hired one, but then they finally stumbled across Jeremy Pruitt. So what about for you as far as the disappointment, this maybe a potential surprise, that kind of for a college football head coach?
Yeah, gosh. I mean, there's the obvious when you look at the disappointments. I mean, obviously, Tennessee's entire coaching search was a disappointment to me. I think they just really blew it. They hired Greg Schiano, and then they basically fired him right after they hired him, which was, I mean, that was one of the weirdest situations that I can ever remember seeing in a college head coaching search. I mean, you reach an agreement with a coach, and then you have to basically void the contract. I mean, that's odd.
Yeah.
And that put an asterisk next to the whole Tennessee thing. So I think their whole coaching search in general was a disappointment. But I think, to me, the one hire that I think people are overlooking as a potential disappointment, and maybe I'm overrating this, and you can just feel free to disagree with this, I think the most overrated head coaching hire was Chip Kelly.
Oh, wow.
I think that, I mean, Chip Kelly did a great job at Oregon, but what was it about the Oregon program that he did well? Well, first and foremost, they had the high-flying offense, which was great. And Oregon became known for that high-flying offense. And it even took them, without Chip Kelly there, it even took them to the college football playoff when they had the perfect storm of the quarterback and Marcus Mariota and a couple defensive stars and just the ability to get to that point. But what did he actually do in Oregon besides set that all up? And what is he going to do out at UCLA? That's a very, very, very competitive recruiting landscape out there in California. And what edge does Chip Kelly have right now over USC, over Oregon, over all those schools? He's got to find that edge again, and that's ultimately why I think he picked UCLA over Florida, is because he has that familiarity in recruiting out there on the West Coast. But I don't know, UCLA to me, it's not and this may be just an uneducated opinion. I may be ignorant to this, but this is just my outside opinion. Very, very outside opinion. UCLA doesn't have a great football fan base. They're not really the most passionate football school that I've ever watched on TV. Even now with Josh Rosen, they're not getting tons of national exposure, and they're not winning a lot of games.
Mm-hmm.
And why is that? Well, maybe that is due to the fact that the supporting cast isn't all that great, but Chip Kelly's got a big situation ahead of him there, especially with Rosen probably leaving for the NFL. So I don't know. That's my take on it. I don't know what you think about that.
Well, it's interesting because there are two potential, well, maybe three, but I really believe that there's two potential boom or bust head coaches that were hired. And that was Chip Kelly to UCLA and Jimbo Fisher staying in conference and going to Texas A&M. Because, what am I talking about? Florida State was ACC. Never mind. I just think as far as regardless the boom or bust, because of the popularity surrounding both of those head coaches, if you do not pan out or even for that matter, because it's a lot of factors that go into college football. Recruiting is a massive, massive deal, obviously, because if you're not recruiting, you're not getting the type of players that you necessarily want to run your program. And especially for Chip Kelly, and he's shown the ability to recruit, we've seen him certainly be a great college football head coach, at least in the time at Oregon. He single-handedly created this spread option offense for Oregon, necessarily, with his apprentices and coaches underneath him, certainly helping him with that. But I think that is it evolved now to the point where, see, that's I think my problem is I think that for Chip Kelly, if he was wanting to re-evolve college football, then I would say, it's a great idea for Chip Kelly to go to UCLA. But for Chip Kelly, he isn't really going into a situation that is a boom, aside from the fact that UCLA is a good program. I mean, it's one of the more historic programs that's in the country. But overall, it's not a program that necessarily you would think of that would be that's going to certainly challenge for a national championship every year, knowing the fact that the Pac-12 is one of the best conferences in all of college football. So you're going to be competing against, an Oregon again, a USC especially. So like, say, Sam Darnold returns to school, you're going to be going up against that quarterback, and he's probably going to light you up because we know historically Chip Kelly has had pretty bad defenses at Oregon. They've had a lot of bender breaks, certainly, but it's kind of like the New England defense, I should say, to where it's bend but not break. But they're pretty bad as far as their defense, and so I think that I would agree with you. I think that the Chip Kelly thing, it has a good opportunity as far as recruiting for it to be a massive boom for that program. But if those recruits do not pan out, it will be a significant bust. But the Jimbo Fisher one is also intriguing to me because, he signed that 10-year, $70 million contract, which is unheard of for really any head coach for that matter. And for him to leave Ship the way that he did against Florida State was almost like it really didn't matter what happened in that program, that he had so much ill will to that program that he just picked up and left. So, I don't know, and maybe that alone is enough for him to be driven to try and make that Texas A&M program better, because, I mean, it was Texas A&M for maybe a good comparison was kind of like, to maybe use a Nebraska reference, was kind of like Bo Pelini when Nebraska was here. Jimbo Fisher, Kevin Sumlin, who's actually a pretty darn good coach, was winning games about 8-9 games every single year, but never really going over over that threshold of winning a championship. And so I think that obviously was Jimbo potentially the right guy, possibly as far as on paper, but it goes back to that Chip Kelly thing as far as if you're not getting those recruits, it could potentially backfire on you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a tough place. I mean, Texas A&M has gotten the recruits in recent years, but it is tough for them to win the SEC with all that competition out there. And so I think that'll be a really interesting program to watch because Jimbo did such a good job at Florida State of recruiting talent. But again, that's another job where it's just like, is that just a place that produces really good quality NFL prospects, or is it a place where those players are developed, in a team setting to win? He's going to have to change that culture around because right now most of what Texas A&M is doing is just developing good NFL prospects versus actually guys that can win at the collegiate level. So they've got to find a balance there. They've got to find the right quarterback, and they've got to get they've got a tough task ahead of them in the SEC for sure.
Who's your good hire?
Good hire. Well, Cam, I'm going to steal what you would probably say here, and I'm going to say that Scott Frost is a good hire. In fact, I would say that Scott Frost was probably the best hire made in college this year. And I think that as Broncos fans, if people who are listening to this are Broncos fans, and they can appreciate this, that having a person like Scott Frost, who has so much history with the Nebraska program, who is beloved by the state of Nebraska and all the Husker football fans, a person who has excelled both as a player, as a coordinator, as a head coach, someone who excels in all they do on or off the field. Does that remind you of anybody? A quarterback who wears number 7. I mean, can we give any more hints here?
Yeah.
What Nebraska has done is effectively the head coach version of what the Broncos did when they said, you know what? We need John Elway to come back and save our franchise. And Nebraska said, you know what? We need a former one of our all-time great players, an All-American. We need him to come back and be sort of the savior of our football program again. And so I think that to me, just even as a morale booster, as a way to get recruits to come in, what a way for them to be able to have the timing. I mean, you hate to see anybody lose their job, and I think it's a shame that it didn't work out with Coach Riley, but I think Nebraska's in a great position right now where you need to rebuild, and you're going to be able to do that with Scott Frost as the head coach. Absolutely.
He put it best. I don't know if you watched his press conference. So in essence, I agree with you because one, I love the team, but two, it feels perfect on the surface. It really does. And people can say that I'm biased to it, and maybe I am. But the fact is that you outlined it perfectly. I'm also a Bronco fan, so I'm going to be looking at it kind of the way that you did, which is that whole John Elway dynamic, which you had. Well, and even then you had that good stopgap, which was the best head coach potentially in college football history, which was Tom Osborne, former congressman turned athletic director, had the program headed in the right direction, but due to the relationship potentially with, Bo Pelini and then Osborne stepping down and getting into Eichhorst, ended up really kind of severing a relationship potentially with Nebraska and its fans. And I think Scott Frost put it best, and I think that, there were a lot of things that he said that were very bright in his interview, and one of them was he talked about how much he loves it here in Nebraska, and he wants to get back to that winning culture that he had there as far as the discipline, treating the other team with respect, which I thought was kind of a shot to the fans, because overall the fans of Nebraska have been pretty respectful. I mean, you're living in Nebraska right now, so you can at least potentially attest to it, and I'm sure the coverage has been incredible as far as the hiring of Scott Frost with the media. But, it's just it felt like the perfect storm. It felt like the perfect place. And Frost said the timing was right for him to go to Nebraska. He's called the native son for a reason, you know. And even going just to the coaching aspect, I'm not being biased here when I say this, but people do feel that it wasn't Chip Kelly that revolutionized. We were talking about Chip Kelly earlier and his coordinators. A lot of people that I've read as far as Twitter and in that college football world, a lot of people feel that, you know, it wasn't Chip Kelly that revolutionized necessarily the offense at Oregon. It was Scott Frost. I mean, he was one of the key cogs necessarily as far as creating Marcus Mariota. I mean, he was a wide receiver coach, turned offensive coordinator, and really elevated the game of Marcus Mariota to win a Heisman Trophy. So he's clearly shown the ability, and I should say he's also had the NFL mentorship of Bill Belichick and Bill Walsh. So he has a lot necessarily on the table that, and I hate to say it as a Nebraska fan, but if you're an NFL potential coach, an NFL franchise, and you're looking for maybe that one coach that could necessarily step you in the right direction and maybe help as far as a talent evaluator, I wouldn't be surprised if Scott Frost his name is being thrown around potentially in the National Football League. Doesn't mean he's not going to take it as far as that step up, but I do think that because he's been such a great talent evaluator, we could see his name being thrown around, you know, in the NFL. But it's and the other point too is that, and you can attest to this because I was in Nebraska's division. It is a weak division. I mean, really, the only competitors in that Big Ten West division is Iowa and Wisconsin. That's it. I mean, Northwestern is so up and down. We don't know what team's going to show up every year. And, you know, and then you look at Minnesota. They're also unpredictable. Indiana is certainly coming up a little bit, but it's gradual. Same with Maryland, I guess. Rutgers as well. But the division is just so up in arms. And I thought that Scott Frost put it best as far as talking about his offense. And he said that we're not going to let us change to the Big Ten. We're going to let the Big Ten change to us. So I thought that mentality should send shockwaves really to the rest of the Big Ten. So
yeah, he's gonna change the dynamic of what it looks like, and I've been interested to see something like that in the Big Ten for a while now. So I'm excited to see what he does, especially considering Nebraska's landed 2 top 10 quarterbacks in their last couple of recruiting classes, including this year and last year. So it'll be exciting to see what they're able to do with what they've got and whatever he brings in.
you're referring to is it Tristan Gibbia or are you referring to Patrick O'Brien?
Well, this year they've got
Right, that Adrian Martinez guy
that's coming in. I think the first one that you mentioned is definitely one of them. And this year they've got a guy coming in, Adrian Martinez. I'm looking it up here. Adrian Martinez from Fresno, California. He's the number 9 ranked dual threat quarterback in the country, and so we'll see as long as he feels he fits in with the plans that Nebraska has. I think that's an option there, but. They've got some interesting guys to consider at that position specifically, and but I'm excited to see what Frost is able to do with the young talent there in Nebraska.
Last one, and then we'll move over to baseball. But the other surprise, and potentially a maybe good fit, and I guess we were dogging on him in the beginning as far as all the interviews and everything like that. I think when all is said and done, the turmoil of Tennessee, and it's easy to coin them as a very disappointing team as far as the whole process. The athletic director had been there for 8 months, didn't know what he was doing, kind of was in over his head, and then fired Greg Schiano due to media backlash. And then through all the span of the interviews, I think that he did hire a pretty good coach. Now, whether that that coach Jeremy Pruitt, the former defensive coordinator, I believe was it Georgia or Alabama, I can't remember.
Alabama, yeah.
It'll be interesting to see where he takes that program, because we've seen Georgia, Kirby Smart, the former offensive coordinator at Alabama, has transformed Georgia. So there's some history now as far as some Alabama coaches that have really resurrected a program. You look at Lane Kiffin at Florida Atlantic, and obviously, well, he was at a short period of time, certainly with Alabama, but still, he's also been regarded as one of the brightest offensive minds in football. So I think that if I'm looking at maybe a potential surprise, that even through all the turmoil and potentially a good fit, I think that Jeremy Pruitt's going to do some things at Tennessee.
Yeah, and he's got a tall task ahead of him. Taking over the Tennessee program, I've been trying to think of what's a comparable, even NFL team right now, because there's plenty of teams that are. It's not like the Browns, because the Browns are just kind of like they're historical.
Yeah, it's historic bad
organization, but like with Tennessee, the expectations are always so high, and the fans are so strong out there. Tennessee football is a way of life similar to what Nebraska football is here, or any of those big college programs. But what is it? What is a good comparison in today's NFL of a team that is like Tennessee, that just can't get it right, but the expectations are always pretty high? I don't know. I guess I don't know. That's not even a valid question, but I thought I had something in mind, and I knew where I was going with that, but now I'm not exactly sure.
Well, like Cincinnati, maybe?
Cincinnati, maybe a team like the Buffalo Bills. I'm trying to think of a team that has an owner that just has unrealistic expectations year after year after year, because they just can't seem to fit. Maybe the Miami Dolphins. They don't have that strong of a fan base, in my opinion. Those are maybe fighting words, but maybe the Buffalo. I would say maybe the Buffalo Bills. That's a team that has a very prideful history, and they've been unable to really latch on to any specific head coach up until Sean McDermott, who looks like a keeper. But they're just a team that prides themselves on winning, even though they haven't been able to win for a very, very long time. So maybe that's a similar situation there. The Tennessee Volunteers and the Buffalo Bills just trying to find someone who can right the ship. And I think you're right. I think Tennessee's in a good position to do that with this hire, even though the way they went about it and the way that they got there was definitely not ideal.
Well, and it's kind of like the whole Tom Osborne thing. The best way to reinvigorate the fan base is to bring back kind of your native coach. Philip Fulmer, run your athletic department, and so I think that potentially did some good there. We'll see as far as how it goes. Obviously I know for the Osborne history that it went pretty good, for the 3 or 4 years that he was there. And obviously Phil Fulmer is a lot younger, obviously. So he'll be there potentially a good while. So we'll see potentially what happens. Yeah.
It's going to be exciting to see.
I know. I just love college football. The bowl season's getting ready to kick off here, and actually I think we had one game, if I'm not mistaken, right?
I haven't. I guess I didn't tune in for whatever it was. If there was
you know what? You know what I was thinking? I was thinking because there's always that Army-Navy game.
Yeah.
At the end of the year, so it kind of feels like a bowl game, when in reality it's just that historical bowl game that will be played every single year, and so So let's transition now into the winter meetings baseball. We love talking baseball. I've been talking baseball with you actually, ever since the winter meetings actually began here in last week, or actually this week, I should say. I want to get your take because I was talking to one of the baseball analytics and my fantasy guru, who's actually on every single Tuesday, and we're talking about Shohei Ohtani. And the news broke near the end of the week that Shohei Ohtani ended up signing with the Angels. He now has that elbow injury, but that elbow strain It's not a tear, potentially. They're worried it might be a tear. But can a dual threat, to use a football term, can a dual threat baseball player actually work? I mean, the last person that ever did it, was the great Herman Ruth, the Sultan of SWAT, the great Hambino, the list goes on, certainly quoting Sandlot here, but yeah, so...
Gosh, I mean, as a Chicago Cubs fan, I think a lot of us were holding out hope that he would be able to be that dual threat player. And I think that the Cubs legitimately pitched him on it. No pun intended there.
Right.
I think the intention was and is for him to be a star pitcher at the major league level, and then for the Angels, I think what he's gonna end up doing is probably just being a designated hitter on a few days where he's not pitching, which is great because then he doesn't have to play in the field. He doesn't have to wear out his arm, throwing the ball, which is something that he would have maybe done playing the outfield for a National League team. Which, by the way, this just raises another point against the American League rules and having a designated hitter. I mean, it's just a stupid, ancient thing. I mean, you do the same thing for both leagues because now, I mean, this is a very, very rare exception, but it gives teams an unfair advantage when you're talking about bringing in a player like this who is capable of playing both ways. And Ohtani, I have to say, the most impressed that I ever was of him wasn't necessarily just his pitching, but when you're seeing this guy hit a 500-foot home run and then you find out, oh, by the way, he's also an ace in their pitching rotation.
Who throws 95 miles an hour.
Impressive. It's a very cool situation, and it's going to help the Angels certainly sell a lot of tickets.
Yeah.
And so they're going to have to play him because he's going to be one of their most popular players. But I think that as far as being a two-way player, I don't think it would have worked for a long time to have him playing in the outfield and pitching on days when he wasn't playing in the outfield. Or vice versa, I should say.
Well, I think that's why a National League team, wasn't exactly the best fit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think with it being the American League, that's why I think the American League was just the best spot for him. And I'm like you. I do not like the designated. I don't like the DH rule. I really don't. Because I'm just a huge fan of, the double switches and all the strategy that goes into the National League. And this is one of the reasons why I like Joe Madden, and it's one of the reasons why I've liked Tony La Russa. It's the fact that you can even give your lineup flexibility by putting your pitcher in the 8th spot, which is just kind of like an American League lineup because you're gonna have a hitter at the 9th spot, which is gonna flip your lineup over. So there's just so much strategy, and that's kind of a different tangent in and of itself. But as far as Ohtani, it made so much sense to put him in the American League. And I think that the other point that threw a lot of people off was this idea from Ohtani, and I really respect it. Obviously, we want the players, and it goes for any sport. We want players to come join our favorite team. That's just the way that we are. It's the way that we are as fans. It's the way that, is that if we see a free agent, it's the way I am with Nebraska Cornhuskers. I can at least admit that. When I see a Nebraska Cornhusker, necessarily that's a free agent. You and I joke about it all the time, but for instance, Will Compton's going to be a free agent. I said that I would love to see Will Compton be a Denver Bronco at the middle linebacker position. So I think that we always want to be attached to that. But I think the thing that threw off so many people with Ohtani, and that I respect, is this idea that he wants to go to a small market team. And I just respected that as far as where he was going with that. Because all the guy wants to do is play baseball. He wants to be a dual threat guy, and he just wants to play the game. He wants to be a baseball pitcher. He wants to be a hitter, and I think that's why the American League was so appealing to him. And the only other National League team I could say was San Diego because it was in the California area, and he clearly voiced that he wanted to be in the California area, and which is a lot closer to Japan, for people to come over and see him necessarily. But it just was refreshing to see a star really come out and say, I want to be part of a small market team.
Yeah, that's a good point. He didn't care about the money. He didn't care about the fame. He cared about the best baseball fit. And I do admire that about him. And I have since I heard about the fact that he was going to allow himself to be posted when he could. I think teams. What was the maximum? I don't remember. I know there were certain teams that he was considering whose maximum bid, for lack of a better term, to acquire his services was $300,000.
Yeah.
And if he had waited another year, he could have made infinitely more money.
Right.
Which I really, that was one of the reasons why I really wanted him on the Cubs, is because I think that that type of a player on your team who's really in it for the game, the love of the game, I just think that that's such a morale booster for your team as a whole, for your fan base, just to have somebody who's really genuine in their pursuit of to be somebody great at a profession, rather than, all right, I'm gonna go to the major leagues and make as much money as I can before I've even proven anything. And so that's one of the reasons why I really liked this guy. And him being on the Angels, that's great for both of us, because we don't really have to care about where he's doing unless we beat him in the World Series. So we can just watch him and cheer for him and watch now. This gives people. This is another big thing for Mike Trout as well, because I think not enough people in this day and age of baseball are able to watch what Mike Trout is able to do and how good he is.
Yeah.
Because of how bad the Angels have been. And so this could be a real catalyst for them into being a more marketable team, a more watchable team, and they'll definitely be attracting more just general baseball fans across the board, and not just bringing more people into their stadium and as Angels fans, but just general baseball fans like you and me. I know I'm going to be tuning into some West Coast late games this year to see what the Angels have going on with Ohtani and Trout and whoever else they end up. I think they just brought in Kinsler as well, or Cozart.
No, it's Kinsler and Cozart. Yeah, they brought them both in.
They did, yeah. So, I mean, it's going to be a fun season for those guys, because Cozart, and I'm glad to have him out of the National League Central as well, because man, that guy can hit.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of Cubs fans last year that were saying, if the Reds are doing a fire sale right now, they need to be dumping Cozart off to the Cubs, because this guy can really play.
Yeah.
He's going to be a good player with that in that lineup there with Trout. And what they've got going on, so I'm excited to see that team play and what they can do.
Well, and even then, it goes back to your respect comment. They have a lot of people that respect the game there. They have arguably the best first baseman on that team too, Albert Pujols. Formerly of your favorite baseball team, the St. Louis Cardinals. I'm kidding.
My most hated,
but yeah, but you look at it, there's a lot of respect there for players that respect the game. I mean, Mike Trout hasn't even gotten his contract extension yet. That's and so he's playing basically. He hasn't whined about it. His agent's probably doing most of the talking, but he hasn't whined about it. He hasn't said, "I want massive money," So I think it really was a perfect place for Ohtani, for him to just focus on baseball and kind of build that team up. And in essence, this was kind of like the Angels when the Angels brought in Josh Hamilton and Albert Pujols in that season, when Mike Trout was actually there. So it kind of parallels that a little bit. Obviously, it didn't turn out that well, that first season, but, they were competitive that second and third season, and then, it all blew up. But, I think it's a good situation really for Ohtani. I want to talk about the Cubs, obviously, for you. And I want to talk about the idea that you and I were throwing around. and the Bryce Harper and the Manny Machado thing, because it's a fascinating discussion because, and I think for me, and it's hard for me to say because I'm a massive Nolan Arenado fan. I gotta say, I'm wearing a Colorado Rockies jacket right now. But I guess it really doesn't matter overall who you decide to go after, Bryce Harper or Manny Machado, because they're both terrific young players. And Manny Machado has obviously voiced that he wants to be part of a shortstop, and I love Addison Russell. I love Addison Russell's game. I think at times he can be a little bit of an inconsistent hitter where he strikes out a bunch. But there's no telling as far as his ceiling, because I think he has a tremendous ceiling. However, I think as far as defensively, the consistency of Manny Machado's bat, playing for the Cubs organization would really benefit the Cubs, and not only that, but I really do think that if you look at the Cubs, they really should maybe consider Manny Machado, because it's going to actually give more cohesive. There's the word again, more cohesive Cubs defense on the infield.
Yeah, it certainly could be. This is a guy that I haven't watched a ton.
Yeah.
Being that he plays for the Baltimore Orioles, I hear all about him all the time because of how great he is, which is, I'm just looking at his stats right now: 33 home runs, 95 RBI last year. Obviously he's known for his ability to play defense as well, and so I think that there's definitely something there. I mean, you're talking about a 3-time All-Star player here, and a guy who's capable of playing, dare I say, MVP caliber baseball.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the Cubs really see that in Addison Russell, and I don't know if that's necessarily right at this point. There's obviously going to be some growing pains with guys like Addison Russell too, because he's another young player. He came up into the league in that 2016 season where the Cubs kind of just caught fire out of nowhere. They were just a young team that was kind of throwing things at the wall and seeing if anything would stick. And sure enough, here comes all these young stars just out of the woodworks. But you're right; it's been inconsistent for Russell so far. As in his first 3 seasons with the Cubs, struggled a little bit with injuries. And this past year only played in 110 games and had 43 runs batted in. And so he took a while to get going. Russell did this year, but he's a guy that the Cubs they have those high hopes for. They probably feel he can be a 100 RBI guy in their lineup. He had 95 RBI during their World Series run. And so he's proven himself to be clutch, and he's proven himself to be a really good fielder. I think last year he had a couple more errant throws than he did the year before. But 2016, the Cubs are going to look at that 2016 season and say, that's the Addison Russell that we're planning on being, the guy who had all those extra base hits, the guy who had 95 runs batted in, and the guy who was nearly flawless in the field. And earned an all-star appearance, maybe partly because of the popularity of the Cubs, but also because, he was that good of a defender, and he was a difference maker late in games for them.
I want to get your take on it. Why Bryce Harper?
Why Bryce Harper? Well, the number one reason is because Jason Hayward has been a bit of a disappointment. I think the Cubs signed Jason Hayward with the thought that he would be able to, at a minimum, be a decent leadoff hitter, if not a good, number 2 hitter in their lineup. But because of how bad he's been at the plate, the Cubs have really had to reshuffle their lineup and use Jason Hayward as essentially just a elite fielder who, I hate to say this because it's it's not quite this bad, but he's essentially like having another pitcher in the lineup, which is a real hindrance to what the Cubs are trying to do. And so I think with the big money that he was paid, the expectations that the Cubs had for him, I just don't think he's met that. And another guy, he played 126 games last year. His batting average went up, but he was still struggling at times with hitting too many ground balls and hitting too many pop flies. That simply isn't going to cut it. 59 RBI for a guy that's getting paid as much as Jason Hayward is. You just gotta look at that for what it is,
Well, I think the issue potentially could be for Harper. Look, he's going to get his deal because the talent we all know is there. When healthy, he's a top 4 player in Major League Baseball. But I guess the issue would be is because he hasn't really had a full season. He really hasn't. When he's had a full season, he's played an MVP type year. And in essence, it could be kind of like the Troy Tulowitzki syndrome when he was with the Rockies, is that when Troy Tulowitzki was in the lineup, both he and Carlos Gonzalez, they fed off of each other, and they were helping win games for the Rockies. And so I think that for Harper, it takes them to a whole other level as far as the lineup, in essence. And so I think that as incredible as that lineup is for the Chicago Cubs, getting a guy like a Bryce Harper, would really put that lineup, and even a Manny Machado too. And maybe that's just it. Aside from, which position is the most weak, potentially, there's really no right or wrong answer. Do you want Manny Machado? Do you want Bryce Harper? Because they're both, A+ defensively. They have a strong arm. They just play different, they just play different positions. One is a versatile third base / shortstop. He wants to be a shortstop. And the other one is probably best suited for right field, potentially. So I think it's great. And if you can get your favorite player, Kyle Schwarber, and get him healthy, it looks like he's hitting the weight room hard. If they can get him healthy, I could see the Cubs making it. But, as I mentioned, potentially, what about the possibility of adding a starting pitcher?
They need to fill one more spot. They do. And I don't think it's going to be Jake Arrieta coming back, because Jake Arrieta wants too many years on his contract, and the Cubs did get, and you can even fill me in a little bit on Tyler Chatwood. What I know of him, as the Cubs signed him to a 3-year contract, what I know of him is that he played a lot better outside of Coors Field than he did at Coors Field, and that bodes well, obviously, for him now playing at a stadium other than Coors Field. But I'm excited about that addition as a potential 4th or 5th arm in the pitching rotation. But right now, the Cubs lack that presence. Not as the 5th starter in the rotation, but as just they need a 5th starter. There's questions of whether or not that's going to be Mike Montgomery, who is famous now for getting the last out of the 2016 World Series, but also is a pretty good young pitcher, a left-hander who's got that power curveball. And so, I don't know. I think the Cubs, they've been talking about Alex Cobb, the pitcher from the Tampa Bay Rays, and obviously they hired pitching coach Jeff Hickey to come in, and he's coming from the Rays organization, and so there's the Chris Archer trade rumors that always pop up with the Cubs. So you've got that, and you've got Cobb, and you've got guys that are still out there that the Cubs could be looking at in a possible trade. But I think overall, I think that their staff is really good at the top with John Lester, Kyle Hendricks, and Jose Quintana. Those 3 are going to hold up as, one of the best trios in baseball, in my opinion. They all bring something different to the table. But I think that's going to be a really good trio for them, and I think Chatwood is a really good 4 or 5, but I think there is one piece missing, and I don't know exactly what that is, but I think whether it comes via trade or whether it comes via free agency route. I think that the Cubs are being diligent in looking at every option possible.
Well, here's a little of a career stat for you. He's only played 2 games, should I say, 2 games at Wrigley Field. But in those 2 games, he is 2-0 with a .69 ERA.
Hey, we'll take that.
And and I think the thing that could even be with Tyler Chatwood, he's just so flexible, and you guys are, especially the Cubs, you guys are going to enjoy Tyler Chatwood because he's shown the ability to be in the bullpen and pitch pretty effectively. He has a really good sinker ball. And I think the one thing that you'll have to notice, and you can let me know when you see him pitch, but I've noticed a lot of similarities in delivery between he and Roy Oswalt. Obviously, I'm not saying that he is a Roy Oswalt, but just as far as delivery and everything, there's a lot of similarities. When Roy Oswalt signed with the Rockies at the tail end of his career, Chatwood was one of the pitchers that really took under Roy Oswalt and wanted to learn the intricacies of learning how to pitch. And so for him, he really has shown that when he's on his game, his sinker baller is unhittable. And I think we saw that when he had that road ERA that was, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was like under 3 that one year when he was under 3. So he's clearly shown the ability to be a really good pitcher. So while I think that I agree with you that he's going to end up being a back of the rotation type player, I think he could be your right-handed version of a Mike Montgomery. Tyler Montgomery. We're all thinking football right now. Mike Montgomery. I think he could be your Swiss Army knife as a right-hander. I think that just gives you a lot of flexibility. And a lot of people have compared him to Charlie Morton, because he's getting to that point in his career. He's 28. So it's I think it certainly is something to monitor. Certainly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you look at the home and away splits, it's a big difference. And so I think that's a player that I'm definitely excited to see. The ERA at Coors Field of 6.01 in 12 starts there, and then the ERA on the road of 3.49. And I mean, it's just a stark difference.
Yeah.
Especially considering he pitched 7 more innings on the road this past year than he did at home, and so he was pitching more on the road, and his ERA was under 3.5. And so I look at that. I like that a lot. Looks like he's at a 7, just hovering over 7 strikeouts per 9 innings. So that's pretty good, and obviously he gets weak contact on the ball, and so at Wrigley Field, playing with that middle infield of Russell and Baez, I mean, those Bash brothers up the middle, I think that's going to be really nice for him as a pitcher, knowing that he can trust those guys behind him to make plays on all those ground balls he can induce.
Yeah. All right, let's go to the best part. Let's talk some Denver Broncos right now.
All right.
Finish it off. Finish it off for about 15 minutes. We got about 15 minutes left. Vance Joseph came out today and kind of hinted towards the fact that he is leaning towards wanting to play the young players, which is such a relief based on everything that's unfolded at now 5 and 9. No, wait, 5 and yeah.
Yeah, 5 and 9.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was gonna say the record. Yeah, 5 and 9. I keep forgetting about that early bye week. It's throwing me off. But yeah, so is it right for him to turn it? I guess that's really the question of questions as far as the quarterback situation, especially this year. Is it right for him to turn it over to, say, a Paxton Lynch, knowing the type of game that Brock Osweiler just put up on Thursday night, and understanding it was against the Indianapolis Colts, who were horrendous on defense?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that the easy answer for me is that yes, you have to get Paxton Lynch out there as soon as possible, no matter what. No matter what, Brock has proven himself in this league at least as a capable backup quarterback who's a good leader on and off the field. In fact, as a matter of fact, I think in the games that he's played as the Broncos quarterback this year, I think he's been the best quarterback on the team. And so I would personally like to see him get re-signed. Give him a couple million a year to be your, at least your backup. If not, maybe compete for a starting job. I hate to even say that because we as Broncos fans want a solution that's going to elevate the team. And, if you go into next season and Brock Osweiler is your number one quarterback, that's not going to inspire a ton of confidence. But I think at least give him some backup money, bring Brock Osweiler back. You know what he is, you know what he can do, and he just played the best game of his life. Don't risk getting him injured or anything like that. Let Paxton Lynch go out there. He's got a 10-day break here. He's been recovering for a few weeks already. Let him get ready for this 10-day stretch. Just let him know that he's going to be the starter, and give him the opportunity to say, you know what, for these final 2 weeks, this is your job. We're going to cater everything to you. I need you to go out there and make plays, and they need to see him make some plays. I mean, 2 games is not a big enough sample size, even considering where the Broncos are right now, which is in desperation mode at the quarterback position. 2 games is not going to be enough to determine whether or not Paxton Lynch has a future with the team, but it's going to have to. It's unfair to him, but it's the way that the business of the NFL goes. I think Chris Collinsworth or Mike Tirico said it last night on the broadcast, your availability is your best ability.
Yeah.
And Paxton Lynch has been unavailable this season due to injury, and the Broncos maybe mishandled the way that, and I wouldn't even say maybe, I would say they mishandled this whole situation by giving Trevor Siemian so much time to basically become a guy that they could not rely on the field. They gave him 24 or 25 games. And they could have given those 25 games to Paxton Lynch, knowing what we know now, which is that they haven't made the playoffs the last 2 seasons. And if you're going to go through 2 seasons of not making the playoffs, you might as well develop a young quarterback. But I don't think the Broncos knew what their expectations should have been or what they were supposed to be, and so they really flubbed that situation. But you have to get Paxton Lynch out there as soon as possible so you can see what this guy's got when you give him a situation and just say, look, this is your team right now, and we're trusting in you. And you saw the emotion on his face when he got hurt against the Oakland Raiders. You can see how badly he wants to play and how badly he wants to do well, but you can't do that when you're sitting on the sideline, and Brock Osweiler should know that as well as anyone. So
right.
I think that I think you have to get Paxton Lynch out there regardless of how well Osweiler played last night, which he did play really well.
I think for me, and I'm with you, you have to see what you have in Paxton Lynch, because it's at that point where the best alternative and the cheapest alternative is for you to see what you have in the young guys. And that does include D'Angelo Henderson, obviously, who has been so MIA. And I feel like the best stat that has truly been a microcosm of this entire season as far as the potential draft class, and I call it kind of the John Fox syndrome, in a sense of not wanting to play the young group of rookies. I mean, really, the only 2 players that have at least shown an impact, 3 that have shown an impact, is DeMarcus Walker, Garrett Bowles, and Isaiah McKenzie. The rest have just been MIA, inactive, or on IR. Obviously, DeMarcus Walker's been inactive the entire season, and Isaiah McKenzie has been a disappointment. He's been terrible, but this whole notion. And I was talking to a guy on Twitter about it, just last night. It's just people that have this notion that he's had a bad rookie year, a terrible rookie year, one that he wants to throw in the trash can, talking about Isaiah McKenzie and DeMarcus Walker. I'm sure they want to throw it in the trash can. But these guys, and especially Garrett Bowles right now, we were seeing, you and I were seeing it as far as the talk necessarily of Garrett Bowles and people really hating on Bowles potentially as a tackle, and this idea that they need to cut or release a rookie after their first year, it's asinine. I mean, because you do something like that, regardless of as bad as the situation was, it sets your franchise back so many years because of the process that it takes for a draft pick to develop. I mean, look at Cody Latimer. We easily could have wanted to release Cody Latimer if we wanted to 2 years ago. And right now, Cody Latimer is up for a contract extension and deserves a contract extension.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to be willing to take some time with guys. And obviously, what the Broncos really need to do is they need to find guys that can contribute a little bit sooner. And I think that there's nothing wrong with being patient with guys, but specifically, this is the catch-22. You want to play rookies, and you want them to struggle towards success, so to speak. But at the same time, you got Broncos fans that are being extremely harsh on Garrett Bowles. I mean, the guy's a rookie offensive tackle, and we knew what he was coming out. Number one, he's a bit raw as a left tackle. He's only been playing football for how many years now? But he's a physical brute of a guy who is just, you saw it a little bit in last night's game towards the end there. I don't know if you saw this, but near the end of the game, Bowles was getting into somebody on a run block. I think it was even maybe the last running play of the game, if you go back and watch it. Bowles was getting into somebody, a defensive lineman on a run block, and after the whistle, the defensive lineman threw Bowles onto the ground because he was getting under his skin, and you could tell that. And I love that about Bowles. I love his nasty attitude. But at the same time, a lot of Broncos fans, I won't overgeneralize, a lot of Broncos fans are so impatient with players like Bowles who are developing on the fly. We were impatient with Bradley Roby while he struggled early on. But look at what happens when you develop players in this league. Not everybody's an overnight success in the NFL. In fact, most players don't even make it. But when you look at the success of some of John Elway's draft picks over time, and I'm actually gonna write an article about this because, and I kind of want to be a little bit cynical with it. But look at 3 of the day 2 draft picks of John Elway's that sucked. According to the fans who balled out last night, starting with Brock Osweiler, a former second-round pick, and then you look at Cody Latimer, a former second-round pick, and then there was one more guy that I was thinking of that I'm blank. Oh, Jeff Hireman, former third-round pick, who had the big touchdown catch to kind of seal the victory. So those players who were crappy draft picks by John Elway, so to speak, came out last night and were the biggest contributors in the victory. And granted, it's a meaningless game against a terrible team. I get that. I'm not ignorant to that. But just the fact that those guys showed up and they showed why they were high draft picks at one point in time, even for a brief glimpse, gives you hope that, hey, maybe they have something figured out there in Denver. Maybe these guys aren't that bad. They just need time to develop. And so I think we as fans need to be patient, especially with guys like Bowles who have been, he's been starting all year. He's been going through, the rookie battle of, the holding penalties, just the occasional whiff in judgment where he will completely miss on a pass protection. But then you see plays like last night in the running game where he just mauls people. And you'll see pass protection where he just mirrors a speed rusher like it's not even a big deal. That's the thing with Bowles. He's so athletic that he can mirror those speed rushers. Vance Joseph has talked about it all season long. He's been asked, why is it that tackles in this league struggle? And he says, and he's right. As much as Vance Joseph has been wrong this year, he's right about this. Athletically, the tackle versus the edge rusher in today's NFL is the biggest mismatch in professional sports. Von Miller going up against a 320-pound man is just not fair.
Mm-hmm.
And Garrett Bowles is dealing with that as a rookie offensive tackle. He's dealing with one of the hardest matchups in professional sports to neutralize. But in my opinion, he's done a great job. We don't have a quarterback like Drew Brees in New Orleans, who Ryan Ramczyk can look really great because he's got a quarterback who gets rid of the ball so quickly, and he's got an offense that has so much talent and so much balance right now that his job is made so much easier. Bowles doesn't have that luxury. Bowles has had to block for Trevor Siemian, who holds onto the ball too long and drifts back out of the pocket and makes it even harder for Bowles to create an appropriate pass set. And so you've got to factor all those things in. And so the long and short of it is we haven't gotten to see some of the rookies that we want to see, but the rookies that we have seen, the fans are being overly critical of. I think there's got to be some kind of balance there.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other point is certainly, we were touching on Vance Joseph. It was reported, obviously, that he's expected to be retained, which, by all intents and purposes, that's fine. I mean, firing a first-year head coach, in essence, does look bad. And especially with the amount of coaches and head coaches the Broncos have had in the last 3 seasons, does sound overwhelming if you fire Vance Joseph. So on the surface, it made a ton of sense for them to retain Vance Joseph with that. And we also understand the culture, certainly, and the decisions that was necessarily being made that were pretty bad. You know, the whole Jamal Charles thing probably overshadows it more than anything.
Yeah.
And so I think the question I would ask is it right for the Broncos to retain Vance Joseph?
Boy, that's a great question. It is a great question because what were and this is the counter question that I have to that question. What were the expectations going into this season?
Right.
From the fan perspective, I think that a lot of fans expected that the Broncos were going to compete for a Super Bowl title. A lot of other fans thought that there was no chance that they were going to be competing for a Super Bowl because of how bad Trevor Siemian is, or because of how bad or how unknown Paxton Lynch still was. So you had even fans split on their expectations for this year. But with the defense that Denver has, it's hard to expect that they would have lost as many games as they have. To lose 9 games with the number 1 total defense in the league, I don't know how often it happens in the NFL, but it can't have happened very many times. Because when you turn the ball over at such an alarming rate, your defense takes a toll on your defense. And so, for me, the biggest question is what were the expectations going into Vance Joseph's rookie head coaching season? If your expectations internally were that you were going to struggle and you realized that you didn't have a solution permanently at the quarterback position and that it was going to be a bit of a struggle this year, there's no way you could fire him unless you went 2-14 or 3-13. And that's why the reports came out before that Jets game saying that Vance Joseph needed to win 2 more games in order to keep his job. And the Broncos were facing 2 very winnable games at the time of that report versus the Jets and at Indianapolis on a short week. And the Broncos won both of those games decisively. And I think that that's a testament to what this team can be. And we saw it early in the season, too, against the Chargers and against the Cowboys and in a close win against the Oakland Raiders as well, that this team is capable and has been capable of playing good football. And you look at the common denominator in all 5 of those wins. What's the common denominator in all 5 of those wins? The quarterback played well. And when the quarterback played horribly, which was for 8 straight games, that was the time when the Broncos went on a bad losing streak. And I think John Elway, he understands that. He has to. And the quarterback situation is not Vance Joseph's fault. It's John Elway's thing. And so I think that you have to look at it like that. And I think in that way, Joseph, to me, gets the benefit of the doubt because the expectations for him this year can't have been to win even the AFC West.
Yeah, I agree. And it's just interesting because, you know, you look at it, and this will be the final question before we we finish the show. But I think to me, and it's just such an interesting scenario now, because in order to decide to want to get a top flight quarterback, and the free agent class certainly looks like it might be pretty good. And I'm of the impression, that I actually really like the draft class necessarily more than potentially anyone. It's just you can kind of pick who you want to go towards. The cheapest option sometimes, in my opinion, is always the best option. But you also understand that in order to win a championship, and if this is a championship, and if what John Elway said was true when Peyton Manning came in, that this team is all about winning world championships, winning Super Bowls, then you need to get a Kirk Cousins. And unfortunately, that could come with a price, because of the fact that if the Broncos do have the number 1 overall defense, is it right to cut players, knowing that despite the horrendous season that it was offensively, is it fair to the defensive players to release them in order to make the quarterback better?
Yeah, that's a tough call as well. I'm of the opinion I would really rather not blow things up, to be honest with you.
Yeah,
especially the way the defense has played lately.
Yeah, you and me both. And I think that's why, and I've heard, that they aren't really sold on that draft class. And maybe that's just a smokescreen. I don't know. Be great if they were.
Yeah, you never know. You never know what to believe at this time of year. And we talked a little bit on the last time I was on about those college quarterbacks that could be available. And, you look at guys like Josh Rosen and Sam Darnold, who's rumored to be going back to school, and Baker Mayfield, the Heisman Trophy winner, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Mason Rudolph. This is a star-studded quarterback class from a college production perspective. The disconnect is that, and we talked about this the last time I was on too, that every single one of those guys seems to have a fatal flaw, and that could scare John Elway off of wanting to kind of make a long-term investment and really turn the reins over to his team, to a rookie quarterback who may or may not eventually work out. I mean, the whole Paxton Lynch situation has to have scared him a little bit, whether or not he would admit it. But you can't operate that way in the NFL either. So at the same time, he's got to look at it as a chance to start afresh. And so I think that you have to find the right guy that's going to be the best option to build the team around for the foreseeable future. Kirk Cousins is going to cost a lot of money. He's going to cost a lot of money for a long time, and that's the scary thing about that option. What if you go the option that the Bears did this past year, where you pay kind of almost half price for a somewhat young but also veteran quarterback who could start if needed? I mean, Mike Glennon's not the best example of that, but maybe there's somebody else out there that the Broncos could go for in a better
Josh
free agent
McCown.
class. Josh McCown, exactly. Somebody like that who can start for you, but he's not your long-term option. You clearly have a plan in place. I don't think the Broncos had a clear plan in place, because it seemed like they were pitting Simeon and Lynch against each other and saying, may the best man win, rather than just saying, you know what, Lynch is our first-round pick. The guys can play. It's just a matter of time.
And I wonder too if they panicked, because it seemed like it was at that point, at that same year, that it seemed like Colin Kaepernick to the Broncos was a formality. And I wonder if once that unfolded, because let's be honest, I think that was the first year I was at Predominantly Orange, and I was kind of following that like a hawk. Everything that I gathered was that it was the Broncos were bust. No other team was. Once you started seeing all the other teams fall off, it became clear that it was Colin Kaepernick to the Broncos, and all it was the pay cut for Colin Kaepernick, which he didn't want to take. And so I think when all told, I think Elway maybe panicked late because there was talk that it was going to go into the draft, and I wonder if he panicked, and then because he panicked, he went to, trading a lot of capital to get a guy like Paxton Lynch. And obviously, hindsight's always 20/20. Hindsight is always 20/20. And maybe, it is that he really did want Paxton Lynch overall. We don't know. And the best advice certainly that I ever got was from Troy Rank, who said that, the NFL is like a Kremlin. We don't know what goes behind closed doors. So.
Right, I think, and that's a great point, because a lot of people who want to blame John Elway for the quarterback position don't really consider the fact that there weren't that many great options available to him after Brock Osweiler decided to leave. He had the opportunity to talk with Colin Kaepernick, and he was really the last NFL general manager to show any sort of interest in Colin Kaepernick, at least in terms of legitimately bringing him in for a visit and talking with him about being the starting quarterback and talking about a contract and ultimately offering him a contract, which he declined. And so the Broncos kind of got left high and dry by a negotiation that went south with Colin Kaepernick. And so then, you sort of panic a little bit and turn to the draft, and Elway picking it with the last pick of the first round. What's he supposed to do? Is he supposed to try and trade up to get Carson Wentz when the Eagles paid a price of 2 first-round picks, a second, a third, and more just to move up 6 spots to get Carson Wentz? John Elway can't pull off a trade, a colossal move to go up that high. And so what's he supposed to do? The only other option that was realistically available to the Broncos was to draft Dak Prescott. And you could say that they whiffed on that, sure. And every team in the NFL, I guess, then is guilty of that because he was a 4th-round pick for the Dallas Cowboys. And so I don't know what else John Elway could have done to solve the quarterback position when he got left high and dry by Brock Osweiler and then by Colin Kaepernick. Those were his top 2 options, and maybe Broncos fans will soon find out that that's a blessing in disguise, because those 2 guys turning down, long-term contracts from Denver could pave the way for whoever's coming this offseason to come in and maybe be the long-term solution. So I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I'll have to have you on, as once the draft gets closer, and I agreed to do it with Nick, but we'll have to do a live mock draft, where we do some picks going back and forth necessarily of the first round, and kind of do a live mock draft of where we think these players might end up. I'm kind of looking forward to it. Necessarily.
Yeah, I'm all over that.
Yeah. Well, hey man, it was definitely a pleasure as always having you on, and I love being a part of Predominantly Orange. I love writing about the Broncos. I love talking about baseball, and I respect you, man. I just love having you on the Cam Parker Show.
Hey, the feeling's mutual. It's an honor for me, man. So I appreciate you, and I love the show. So keep it up.
I appreciate your friendship, more importantly.
Absolutely.
All right.
Same here.
Absolutely. Well, hey, man, you take care, and whenever you see Star Wars again, enjoy it.
I'll let you know.
All right, man.
I'll let you know. I'm for sure going next Tuesday, so that'll be the next time for sure that I see it. But if not before then,
well,
that'll be the next.
And as I said, I'm going tonight in about 2 hours for the 9:45 show. And but hey, man, it was always a pleasure. Take care, and I produce Mila Channel and. And write some of that great content on Predominantly Orange. I know that I'll put out some stuff over the weekend also. So thanks again, man.
Yeah, thank you, Cameron. I'll talk to you soon, brother.
Hey, you too. Take care.
All right, bye.
That is the conclusion of the Cam Parker Show. Thank you very much for tuning in. We hope that you enjoyed this episode of the Cam Parker Show, talking about the college football hires, potentially who are some disappointment surprises, good hires, as well as the winter meetings. And we finished it up with the Denver Broncos discussion. Thank you all to those who have listened to the Cam Parker Show over the years, like it and follow it on the Twitter handle at CP_show. Follow at Sayre Bedinger for Sayre Bedinger, and also follow me at Cameron Parker PO. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we will be back on Tuesday for the regular scheduled broadcast at 7 o'clock. Thank you guys for tuning in.